Hi, in this video series, I aim to convince you that cognitive psychology is worth discovering and that it has many practical uses. In this video, I will show you how cognitive psychology led to improvements in how people teach and learn. Use the skills and useful pointers that I will describe, you can perform better when producing essays and taking exams. I will present ways of improving the four aspects of cognition, that is perception and attention, memory, language, and thinking and reasoning. It's true, and these techniques really do work. Now, in the coming weeks, we will talk about the psychological theories and scientific evidence for why they work. But for now, let me simply present a series of techniques to improve your cognition and help your academic progress. So, here are three crucial lessons to take from this lesson. So, the importance of practice, of recognizing familiar problems in unfamiliar forms, and of using your higher level thinking strategies to determine how you approach your work, plan your studies, and structure your written work. So, the brain drives a lot of your abilities to sense. So, to sense, perceive, and attend to the world. But you can also improve many of them by knowing about cognitive psychology. Here I will give you some ideas on how to use knowledge about perception and attention to improve your performance in school and college. So, before we go into the specific details, one general rule is to be aware of your circadian rhythm, the natural cycle of your body. Your brain and body works better at different times of the day, but everyone is different. Some people are best in morning and some in the evening. One of your, I consider myself as a morning person, which means that my attention span is greater around 10:30 a.m. While my fiance is an evening person and her attention span is the greatest around 8:30 p.m. When you are aware of your own circadian rhythm, you can study when it's best for you. Well, of course, schools often set exams in the mornings. This might be dreadful for a lot of evening people. So to ensure that you are in a suitable frame of mind for such exams, you can shift your body clock in a similar manner to jet lag. Basically, what you have to do is wake up much earlier so that the 9 a.m. exam occurs after you've been awake for some time and falls within your optimum attention time. So, here are three tips to further enhance your perception and attention. First, mass your attention or mass your practice, that is. Some experts are able to perceive something, typically an object such as a chessboard. They have extensive experience in perceiving using one eye fixation, that is, looking only at the center of an image. From this scan, they're able to remember, interpret, and process more than mere novices. So, these experts have this ability because of massed practice, which is where a great deal of learning occurs in a short space of time. Now, this method is in contrast with distributed practice, which we will be discussing much later in this video, which involves short intervals of learning. Now, typically, you need to do massed practice for approximately 6 hours a day for weeks, months, or even years. Results consistently show that people who engage in massed practice perform better at perceptual and motor tasks than those who engage in other forms of practice. Consider this: if you play, say, Mobile Legends for 6 hours solidly a day for a year, you'll be better at it than someone who plays it for 1 hour 6 times a day for a year. In other words, to improve perceptual and motor abilities, your practice must be consistent. Here's a caveat though. This technique works for perceptual and motor skills such as playing sports, games including mobile and virtual ones, or music. But it does not work for learning maths and more intellectual subjects. Second is to capture and focus your attention. One way to help engage attention on work is to develop a script that ends with you studying. A script is a chunk of behaviors that always occur together. You can create one by coming up with a routine. So for me, it involves waking up at 6 in the morning, running with the dogs, taking a quick shower after, and then preparing my coffee, reading a news website, and then starting work. You can further improve your attention span and stay focused in a number of simple ways. For example, taking mild to moderate exercise 15 minutes before you attempt to learn, and drinking water filtered with ground coffee beans for me help release the appropriate chemicals in your brain that aid learning and memory storage. One obvious action is to turn off distractions such as mobile phones and Facebook, though I honestly struggle with both. Also, remember that the average person has an attention span of around 40 minutes. Though the figure depends on the task complexity and how you are learning it. After this time, learning new information become harder. So take breaks about 15 minutes after studying for some 30 to 40 minutes. Another key thing here is the ability to multitask. If two tasks use different aspects of your working memory, you can do them both at the same time as long as they are simple enough. But in most cases, performance on both tasks is much slower or lower if you try to multitask than if you do one task at a time. So, it's almost always much better to just do one task at one point in time. Lastly, you have to avoid distractions. Knowing what distracts you means that you can learn how to avoid such distractions. A huge amount of research in ergonomics and human factors has explored these issues, and the resounding result is, tada, speech. That is, speech is the one thing above all else, and in fact, maybe the only one thing that distracts people from working. Whether it's speech from the TV, someone talking, the radio, a person on a telephone, or whatever, researchers call this irrelevant speech effect. And even something that sounds like speech can distract you. The reason is that speech is an unpredictable sound, and yet it carries meaning and has superior access to our memory. That's why that's why open plan offices are so bad for staff productivity if they have jobs that require focused attention. So it's also one of the main reasons why speaking to someone on the phone while driving is incredibly dangerous. To avoid this distraction, the best thing to do is study in an environment where you can avoid other people's speech. That can mean in silence or creating your own predictable noise, such as turning on your music. Yes, you heard me right. One surprising device that focuses your attention is music and or noise in general. Although rather counterintuitive and going against many people's opinion, you can filter out music that's very familiar. And if it's louder than any distracting speech, it prevents distraction. So go ahead and pump up your volume, and if anyone argues with you, say your professor told you to do so. Of course, silence is also as effective. But then, as soon as a speech like noise sounds, it can distract you. Entire field is devoted to how best to learn and remember things. That is my beloved educational psychology. Here, we review some of these techniques related to cognitive psychology. For studying and revision, most of the skills you want to know about concern remembering information, and so that's what we will cover in this part of the video. Most of the techniques I will describe involve you actively processing the information or doing something to aid your memory. Learning is an active process, but some forms of activity help memory more than others. Sadly, simply listening to tapes of something while you sleep or reading a book doesn't provide you with proper environment to learn. Instead, you need to engage with the material, and in order to do this, here's a few strategies. First, work with your memories. Work with your memory. And what I mean by this is that most of the strategies that assist in learning information connect to what we call as the working memory and involve combining new knowledge with existing ones. Here are three examples of how you can do this in order to improve your memory. First is you can do chunking. This happens when you group incoming information that's largely meaningless into small manageable chunks that are meaningful to you. Second is to use the level of processing framework. This technique comes from how you process information and suggests that information that's processed more deeply is more likely to be stored and therefore remembered. You can also use mnemonic devices which aid learning by forming links between the list of information to learn with something you already know. Mnemonics make the information more personally relevant and meaningful, and so you have to elaborate it during processing. By making mnemonics successful, you build more retrieval cues and links to memories. So studies show that memory scores are up to 77% higher for people using mnemonics than for those who don't. What you can do is to replace the words that you're trying to learn with something easier to remember. For example, the use of Roy G. Biv for the colors of the rainbow. Another thing that you can do is replace the entire list of information to learn with a name. For example, the name Luz Viminda is a great mnemonic for the three island groups in the Philippines. Put the list to remember into a tune to form a song. But I will not perform a song today. That's beyond my pay grade. So what you can do is use rhymes or draw pictures to remember information. You may want to create mental images to represent what you need to remember. So second is to distribute your practice. Earlier, we've talked about mass practice. This time, we are going to talk about distributed practice. Now, a consistent finding is that practice makes perfect. You can learn information from a textbook by reading it multiple times, but it's not as simple as that. You can study the same thing for hours and hours and then stop. Or you can study in short bursts. Which is better, you may ask? Results clearly show that distributing the practice is beneficial for academic learning as compared to massed practice, which, as mentioned earlier, is better for motor and perceptual learning. Distributing learning works best when you study in lots of bursts of study of less than 1 hour. Third, you can test what you want to know. Um, One of the most intriguing findings is that test effect. So, which is where you study something for a short period and then test yourself on what you know. Research shows that you learn more than simply studying for the same amount of time. This testing seems to cause you to form new links in your memory with that information. You are building up the links between the information and retrieval cues needed to access the information. So, to remember more, test yourself on what you have learned, correct any errors, and then test again. Lastly, improve your access to cues to get information from your head faster and so aid your exam performance. You can use techniques that improve your access to cues. Here are two specific skills that can help. First, attempt to match the state and environment of learning to that of the test. Evidence suggests that when you are retrieving information in the same condition as when you have learned it, your retrieval is better. This condition can be as simply as being in the same mood, in the same room, in the same sitting position, or using the same pen. This might sound a bit superstitious, but then a number of researchers have shown that this actually works. Anything that can create an extra link between the retrieval situation and the learning situation helps you to retrieve the information. Now, this method is less effective for recognition, and so do not use it for multiple choices exams. Also, do not rely on this method alone. You must have the information stored in your head to be able to retrieve it. A better way to access such cues is to relax your mind and think about other things. When you calm yourself down, a solution often presents itself. This skill stems from very recent research on third stream consciousness, which is where solution to problems, including retrieving memories, can come to mind precisely when you don't try to think about them. So, in order to polish your academic reading and writing skill, you have to do a number of things. Being a student involves a lot of reading. Many adults think that their reading ability is something that they acquire in childhood and is relatively fixed. But as other cognitive skills, becoming an expert reader is a matter of practice. The best way to do this is to read as much and as often as possible. Sometimes adults can have problems with reading because they haven't learned the rules of the language. Research by cognitive psychologist Diane McGuinness shows that adults with poor reading skills often see a great improvement in their reading abilities if they are taught with an extensive phonics-based program, one that emphasizes the correspondence between letters and sound in the language. This research suggests that an inability to read as an adult may be due to not having learned the appropriate spelling sound rules as a child. So, after you have acquired the basic skills of reading printed words, you can further improve your reading skills by using metacognitive strategies. This refer to what you read, what order you read it in, and how carefully you read. The word cognition refers to thinking, and so metacognition refers to thinking about thinking. Well, that's so meta, right? So, cognitive psychologists do this all the time, but everyone can benefit from thinking about how they think. If you're reading a novel, you start at the beginning and read every word until the last page. But this strategy isn't always the best for academic reading. Instead, you can use a range of metacognitive strategies to help you get the most out of the text with the least effort. Here's a process which I recommend and I use myself. Skim or preview the text. So have a quick scan through the document, paying particular attention to any summary at the beginning section, heading, and overall structure. Decide in advance what parts of a document are most important, what bits you can skim over, and what bits you can ignore. The second is to read with purpose. Before you start reading, decide what you want to find out from the text. Setting goals for your reading helps you approach the text strategically. You also have to make your reading personal. When reading an idea, ask yourself what you think about the idea. Do you agree with the author? Does what you are reading fit your existing knowledge? How can the material help you for your purpose, such as writing an essay or reviewing for an exam? So, a similar strategy that you can do is ask questions. Question what you are reading and attempt to anticipate what would follow on. You can also translate your lesson into your own language. You may want to summarize ideas in your own words or explain them to a friend. To do so, you have to process the material more deeply, thinking about the meaning rather than just the words. So you also can make reading interesting. Focus on the ideas in the text that interests you. If a passage is boring or technical, skim over it and come back to it later if necessary. You can also make use of context to make sense of ideas. When children learn to speak, they make use of context to learn new words. If you don't know what a word or phrase is, try to guess what it means based on the parts of the text that you do understand. The next thing that you have to do is make a note and come back to it. If you need to read up some concepts, note them down and look them up later instead of interrupting your reading. Also, keep on the flow. Skimming over bits you don't understand is usually better than the constantly interrupting the flow of your reading. If children stop listening every time they heard a word they didn't know, they'd never learn a language. You may be surprised by how much you remember about a text when you stop trying to understand everything and just enjoy your reading. Also, you may want to read more. Practicing strategic reading of academic books and research paper is the single best thing that you can do to improve. Most cognitive psychology research is published in the form of papers, which follow a standard structure. With practice, however, you discover which bits to focus on and which bits you can skim over depending on what you want to know. So, as a student of cognitive psychology, you will need to write essays and research reports. Both have specific constraints. The first rule of good writing is to understand the format. Read any guidelines you're given and make sure that you know the word limits. Writing has two basic stages. Planning, this is when you decide what you are going to write and in what order, and writing the actual words. Writing is an example of language production. And producing language involves your brain working through a sequence of stages starting with the semantic level, where you develop an idea that you want to express. Then you identify the elements of the sentence such as subject, action, and object, and translate the elements into words. To speak a sentence, you need to convert the sequence of words into a representation of how they sound and then produce those sounds using a complex sequence of movement with your mouth and vocal cords, all without conscious effort. Your brain, through the same process, even when you don't speak out loud, if even when you don't speak out loud, if, like most people, you find spoken conversation easier than writing, you can help your writing by imagining that you are speaking out loud and focus on how your words sound. So, another useful trick is to imagine that you're explaining your ideas to a specific person or group of people that you know. Doing so enables you to bring into play your considerable existing experience of using language. You may not be an experienced writer, but you are an expert at chatting to friends and family. When you imagine that you are doing this, you can exploit a vast reservoir of existing knowledge in your brain. So, imagine that you're talking to a friend is good for improving the fluency of your writing. But when writing essays and reports, you need to take additional factors into account. One is the different style of language used in academic writing, and another is that more specific rules that you're required to follow, such as keeping to word limits or using a certain section heading structure. So you can do two things to improve this aspect of your writing. First, get as much experience of appropriate style of writing as you can. Read lots of research papers and textbooks in your subject to get a feel for the style of writing. Also, you may want to amass a large number of chunks of materials that you can use, such as specific ways to start a sentence. You can also, what you can do is you can also use existing abilities to modify your tone or work within the constraints. You probably use different language depending on whether you are talking to, let's say, a friend, a grandparent, or a stranger. So you already you're already used to modifying your language style for different contexts. Plus, most people have experience of working within tight word limits, thanks to text messaging and Twitter. So, as a pro tip, I can offer you is to use the Manchester Phrase Book. You can visit www.phrasebank.manchester.ac.uk. This is actually a good source for academic writing style. So, after that, you may want to use your thinking powers more effectively. And to do that, you have to consider what we call as the executive functions. Now, executive functions, or EF in some researches, are of the brain, guide your overall behavior, including higher level thinking skills such as problem solving, reasoning, and decision making. Now, this higher level thinking is important in planning your study and the work you produce. You can optimize the use of your executive functioning by first using rational logic. Following this video series will give you a better understanding of the rules of logic and some of the common logical errors that people make. This knowledge can improve your ability to see the flaws in other people's arguments, as well as enhance your ability to construct a rational argument for yourself. It also makes you aware of the steps that people go through when making or understanding an argument, which should help you improve the structure of academic writing. Second, plan systematically. So, planning each stage of a project makes sense, as does identifying the amount of work you need to do and what problems you are likely to face before you embark on a project. Cognitive psychology uses the state space approach to planning. In this approach, you plan a series of states between your current one and your goal state, considering alternative choices that you could make at each stage and how that's likely to affect the outcome. So this technique can give you a good sense of how you need to direct your attention and spend your available time. Third, create and use sub-goals. Students sometimes panic because they see a piece of work as a single indivisible whole that's too big to get their hands around. What you have to do is to divide the task into sub goals using hierarchical decomposition. Here, you break the problem down into a few smaller problems, then repeat the process to break the smaller problems into even smaller parts. Eventually, you will end up with a set of manageable problems that, when combined, solve the big problem. For example, when writing a research report, you can break the problem down into writing each section of the report, then break each section down to its paragraphs. Before you know it, your job is done. Only if it's that easy, right? Now, the more experience you have with the problem, the more likely you are to recognize one that you know how to solve. Also, as you gain experience, you recognize more of the sub goals of a problem and have better ideas about how to solve them. Over time, you build up a store of these chunks of experiences and also learn how to deal with bigger and bigger problems. Fourth is to automate components. The more you practice any skill, the more you can deal with problems automatically. When you repeat a series of actions, the brain comes to recognize the pattern and creates a new procedure for carrying out the process without you having to think about it too much. With lots of practice at writing essays or reports, you begin to be able to do more and more of the process automatically, which frees up your mental resources to deal with bigger problems. Fifth is to work backwards. So, when asked how he creates his new jokes, the comedian Bill Bailey replied, "I start with a laugh and work backwards." Now, this process isn't far from how people often solve problems. In a process called means end analysis, people identify the goal and work out what they can do to achieve it. To get a laugh, you need a punchline. To get a punchline, you need a setup and so on. So when planning your next piece of academic work, start by identifying what goes into top grade piece of work and then work backwards by finding the specific pieces that go into it. Doing so can help you break down the problems of writing your essay. Having a positive goal in mind also motivates you and focuses your attention on the most important aspect of the problem. Lastly, and actually my favorite, is to develop a growth mindset. According to psychologist Carol Dweck of Stanford University, one of the most important factors affecting student performance is what she calls mindset. A person's mindset is another example of metacognition or thinking about thinking. According to Dweck, in general, people um, have one of people have one of two main types of mindsets. You have people with fixed mindset. Now, these individuals tend to think that people are born with certain abilities that remain relatively fixed throughout their lives. People with this mindset are likely to stick to things they're good at and avoid developing new skills in areas where they feel inexperienced. They value achievement over effort and often only like problems they can solve easily. Growth mindset, on the other hand, you have people with growth mindset. So these people display almost the exact opposite approach. So they think that people can get better through practice and so value effort over achievement. They often do much better at new problems because they make an effort and aren't discouraged by their mistakes. Now, the exciting aspect about Dweck's work is that she shows that you can change people's mindset through simple intervention. Even just knowing about the concept tends to make people more likely to shift from a fixed mindset to a growth mindset. Now, the crucial lessons of this video are the importance of practice, of recognizing familiar problems in unfamiliar situations, and of using your higher thinking strategies to determine how you approach your work, plan your study, and structure your written work. With enough practice and effort, you will be able to use the techniques and skills we talked about earlier to improve your academic performance. So, this has been Dex Kamitan, and thank you for watching.